Hey, welcome everyone to the agency sessions. I'm Jason Fisher, and we decided to unveil our vision to Omaha with some of the best and brightest minds in the community to be able to build a narrative around how we're going to build this content creator hub, one of the first of its kind here in Omaha. We've been cooking up this idea for years, and now it's time to involve you, the listeners. This podcast is your backstage pass to the journey. From the freshest voices to the classic minds, agency unites us all. Join us from a what if to we will. These are the agency sessions, igniting your creativity and inspiring action. Buckle up. I think of this as like kind of what some will say is an origin story, because anytime that anything happens that's this big, even with any of us, there's the origin of it all. Mm-hmm. And I would say, just in my opinion, that you're the origin.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It all starts with you, and we hear the term a lot of times of standing on someone's shoulders, passing the baton, passing the torch, all the things generationally. And so from me, when I think about people that have led the way, were trailblazers, and you would say the same about others because you've done in journalism, in arts, and culture, that you are a person who I'm now on the shoulders of. And quite unbeknown to myself, it happened that way. But, you know, a lot of people, I feel like that I was trying to think of the age range of people that knew you, Ben, that know you, that really know you, your audience. When I was 18, that was in 1995.
Okay.
And so I was doing the math the other day of what the viewing age audience was for Kaleidoscope, your show. What do you imagine the age range was?
You know, I imagine the age range was pretty much limitless because you had, during that time, you know, there was not a lot of people of color on television. Sure. You know, in a way where you're in charge and you're producing the program and you're talking about what all is going to be on that particular week or next week or what's going to be on in the future and that sort of thing. So what would happen, and I would hear this more often than not, I would hear from those who were my age and around my age, they were sitting their children down too, you know, okay, to watch Kaleidoscope, because it wasn't, you know, there wasn't a lot on at the time that had the variety that the show had, that had the cutting edge kind of interviews that Kaleidoscope had, because it was essentially, and for me, it wasn't a black show. It was a news show, and it was a news show that portrayed the same stories that you would hear on national and local newscasts, but it would have an African American perspective to it. Yeah, right. And that's what I thought was important when we got started, was that African American perspective be there, you know, so that, for example, when we're talking about police, at that particular time, we're talking about some pretty significant differences between police and the community, and I represented a lot of that, because in my judgment at that time, I considered the Omaha Police Department one of the worst police departments in the country. And my shows kind of reflected that, because every time a black man was shot, which was more often than we would like to think about, during that time, we would just, you know, for that particular show, I would always have Senator Chambers on for the most part, because he would read all the reports and he understood it really well, and I would get the reports, and we would just go through and talk about what essentially happened in that particular instance with that particular black man. Sure. And it was always a black man. And that's exactly the point, is you had a show that, like you said, was a news show, journalism show from a black perspective. Yes. In that era. Now, I wouldn't deny
that there's a wide age range from there, because I think just the word of mouth, and especially that there wasn't the internet at that point in time, the focus on there, this was the biggest thing going for 30 years. And so I'm jumping in to also point out, like, to the point is that I was thinking back, what would stop someone from not knowing about this show from an age range in that time? So me at 18, I'm just getting done with high school, going to college, I'm playing sports, I'm doing all the things, I'm trying to figure out life and everything else. So my bandwidth to watch that wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 47 now, just turned 47 in June. And I bring that up to say that, like, if that gap is there to where I didn't really get a chance to soak up and watch Kaleidoscope because I'm trying to figure out life, then the age range that the most, like the median age range of people who were glued to it and grew up with you for, 10, 15 years.
They're older.
Right, they're older.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I started to realize, the disconnect of all of this journalism, of all these different elements that you brought to television, which was the biggest platform. So to me, you're the original social influencer, social creator, because of what you did.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I bring that up, just to kind of keep going on there of, like, before you were even on Kaleidoscope, and I want to reel it back even further. I got to learn about you. We've worked together on a number of projects, so I want to be full transparent that Ben and I have worked to another projects, but every time we would work on one of his campaigns or community advocacy pieces, I would learn more and more about Ben that I didn't know, and I don't think is public record. You'd have to dig pretty far, and I don't even, it'd be on paper, so good luck finding it. Because it was a different world. But tell us, you shared with me that you're not a politician.
No.
Okay. Why do you say, what does that mean? Translate that. What does it mean? Because it took me a minute.
Well, I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm not a politician because if I were a politician, I probably would have left the LGBT thing alone.
Sure.
Okay. I probably wouldn't have touched that at all 100%. Because that was political dynamite. And not only introducing it once, but losing the first time and introducing it again. If I were a politician, I don't know that I would have ever done that.
Sure.
If I were a politician, when I first got on the city council, I don't think I would have raised the property tax or attempted to raise property tax by 5.2%. But at that time, the city needed the money. The city needed the resources. We were really
strapped.
And we had a major hole that we had to fill.
Sure.
And so if I were a politician, I doubt that I would have done that.
Well, even bigger than that, what I learned is those decisions that you decided to choose for the people and for your constituents.
Yes.
That definitely sticking your neck out more than any person that I know, especially coming out of the gates, and you're new to, but beyond that, you kind of shared with me just upbringing, being around folks who, were from the streets, were from everything else, and it gives a different perspective that you kind of reach this crossroads in your life that you shared with me.
Yeah, that was, I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. And in Cleveland, it was easy to be around people who were let's describe them as nefarious. Okay, doing certain things that were illegal. But you have to remember those times as well. You have to remember the fact that, there was no affirmative action program. Sure. There weren't a lot of these things going on. So black men had to do what black men had to do to survive.
100%.
And so, yeah, there was some illegal activity. Sure. And I got into some of that, and when I graduated from high school, I was kind of at a crossroads because I could feel myself spiraling down. I could feel myself getting into that, and I could feel myself even liking it to a certain point, simply because of the money.
Sure.
Okay, simply because of the money, but there was also danger that went along with that, and there were some choices that I had to make, and a lot of it had to do with I had a girlfriend who was pregnant at the time. I had my two little sisters and others, that, the more I was spiraling down, the more it would have affected them had I stayed.
Sure.
So I had to make a choice, and the choice was to just, and I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just joined the military.
Right.
And I left, and I joined the military, and that got me away from there, and it got me to some photo training in Denver.
There you go.
Which helped me, with my career in journalism.
There you go.
And so after that, we spent it during Vietnam. So I'm a Vietnam vet.
Okay.
And it happened during that time. And so after I left, when I left there, I got a job at Channel 7 before I left the military.
Okay.
And so, by the way, I didn't volunteer to come to Omaha because I had never even heard of Omaha. I didn't know where it was.
Sure.
But after I got out of the military, I was already working at Channel 7, and the show already existed, as were a number of other shows. Okay, because when I came on, it was at that time where we were just coming out of the riots, and so every television station was trying to do something to be representative in some sort of way of African Americans.
Sounds
so
familiar.
There were a lot of
Sounds familiar a little bit.
Yeah. So there were a lot of shows out there,
right,
that I knew wouldn't last unless someone took one over.
Okay.
And so Kaleidoscope existed. I lobbied for it for a period of time. Now, what people may not know is that I never wanted to host it. I wanted to produce it. See, I wanted to control. I just didn't think I was good enough to be a host, quite frankly, to be honest with you. So I thought, I would produce it so that I would have the control over it, so that we could talk about things without African-American things. And as long as we were legal, and we weren't doing anything illegal, we needed to talk about some of these things. And so a lot of things I pushed out there.
Absolutely.
And so, that I got it, and was made the permanent host in January of 1979, and on January 8th, 1979, my first television show as the permanent host of Kaleidoscope, I did an interview with Bill Cosby.
Okay.
And so
that
kind of started me down the road.
And I mean, right, and that shows the arc of just yourself as a character, as a person, also why it's not your typical politician by any means. No. You're a man of the people, in my opinion, and I think many people. You're the people's champ there, and with that, there, as you kind of progressed on that from '79 to when was the last airing?
The last airing of the show was in 2000. Well, it aired after I left, but it was around 2008, 2009.
That's what I was thinking.
And that's when they changed the format, because they kept Kaleidoscope, but Kaleidoscope belonged to me. So everybody that would try to do it it kind of crumbled. It kind of crumbled, and so the Hearst organization already had a syndicated or a show that they liked to do called Chronicle.
Okay.
So they switched from Kaleidoscope to Chronicle.
Gotcha.
And I understood it, because as long as you kept it Kaleidoscope was about Ben Gray.
Sure. It became
you needed
synonymous.
to be about something else.
Yeah.
It needed to be about the future, not the past.
So you go from 79 to 2008, 2009-ish. And then after that, a couple years, and I only go back because I'm talking about the disconnect. And the disconnect from the Black community of people, again, from what was the most popular media source was television.
Yes.
I can remember, even around that time, that was like kind of the tech bubble had burst, the housing crash, all the things were kind of like, I think the tech bubble was probably around the early 2000-ish. But, internet hadn't caught on. If you told somebody back then that, the internet, I think people predicted, and it wasn't hard to see that, Walmart was going to be selling most of their stuff online, that a lot of these big box stores are going to be going out of business. And I bring all that up to say is that now same thing with journalism, news, and everything else. And so we keep going on, and the main media stream right now is the internet. It's been that way for quite some time. And I think a lot of folks generationally and culturally have tried to shift and keep up with that. And the disconnect happens with our not making it political, but just to talk about how it happens to a generation of people. You and I, when we ran across, Hearst, and they're saying, in 2023 that they're just now, themselves are just now digitizing their media. It's mind blowing.
Yes.
I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to ask you, just to kind of paint one smaller picture about, as a timeline kind of as we're building things, is in the George Floyd, when you were in office around the George Floyd incident and everything and what was happening here locally. And I had something very specific on here, was seeing that the disconnect from younger generations on who you were and where you stood, and not knowing that when you started your show, there was another riot that was happening because of civil rights and such. So, how did that, what was the vibe around that? What was kind of the scene around the George Floyd incident and now?
The George Floyd incident, I think it was, I think people didn't, if you don't know history, if you don't know how things got to be the way they are, then you're missing a piece. And that's what part of this is about, because you're missing a big piece of African-American history in Omaha. We're missing a big piece when we don't include Kaleidoscope and other aspects of that. But, when the George Floyd thing happened and, people were angry, they were upset, I gave them a forum to talk. I did a resolution for the city council so that people could just come down and air their grievances and talk. But in the interim, when they started talking about defunding the police, I don't think the younger generation understood where I was with that. And the best way to say this is a quote that I heard from the Honorable Louis Farrakhan.
Okay.
And Farrakhan said in a speech in Kansas, where he was talking about the media, he was talking about a number of other things, but he broke down the word respect. And respect comes from two Latin words, re and specto. Specto means to look, and re means again. So it means respect is gained as you look at something and you watch it grow or not grow. And you either respect or you don't respect based on what you've seen over a period of time. This Omaha Police Department that I was covering as Kaleidoscope is not even close to the same police department now.
Sure.
Okay, but people wouldn't know that then. I did an interview with one radio station once, and they remembered two black young men that were killed by police over a certain period of time. I reminded them of 11.
Yep.
Okay, because that was a police department that was killing black men like they had a license almost to me. And it was a very angry, very tough time. But then as I watched it, starting with Chief Warren, and you could see the gradual changes to this police chief that we currently have. And the police department today is nothing close to the police department that existed 15, 20 years ago.
Sure. And when you got to, and I understand.
And so I supported that. And
100%.
I said, I'm not going to defund the police.
Sure.
In fact, you can talk about other police departments, but this police department is on point.
Sure.
Okay. And it's one of the few in the country that's on point. But but they didn't know the history.
No, and they didn't know the 360 program. They
No.
didn't know a lot of the community and gang intervention that you did. They didn't understand why you were saying that. They were just taking it because it was an angry country.
It was an angry country.
Angry country. We want right now. And even in the mindset of the branding of defunding the police, I'll just go on record of saying that it needs to be branded a little bit different on the wording.
Yes.
I understand the outcomes that they wanted as far as funding other programs and other ways, and they didn't even realize that those programs were already existing. You're saying, yes, but
yeah, police were already doing it.
They were doing a lot of the mental health, pushes and everything else. I think it would have been interesting. Now, I won't get too off on a tangent. If you would have said, and it's tough, it's a slippery slope because you also have to play the strategy game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so much of being a politician, but trying to get a group of people who don't understand the terminology of defund the police, of saying, look, you can call it what you want. And maybe that's the way to say it. I don't know. I'm not good at, I'm not a politician by any means. I'm not the not politician that you are. But if someone want to say, call it what you want, as far as if you want to say defund the police, but what are the outcomes that we need and we feel that we need to go? And I think I could probably point a lot of those out to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where it's at. But we had a lot of angry folks, obviously, in the Black community, even beyond. You got a lot of calls. And a lot of people were just hurt and were mad and wanted someone to pay for it. And that part generationally, I think a lot of times has been where that respect
mm-hmm.
has somehow got clouded, where they don't trust it. But I don't think they knew either where you came from too. And some people just make up a narrative
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, and they say, you know what, Ben forgot where he came from. And that's the false narrative that we made up because they didn't understand what it was. I'm bringing all that to say is that disconnect and that false narrative is because of lack of connection of information.
Exactly.
And that's where we're really getting into. And it hurt my heart because I'm kind of, I guess they call me Generation X, because I could understand what younger generations were saying or trying to say, and maybe
mm-hmm.
just having bad branding on what it was, or they didn't understand and they didn't look into, they didn't take the time to understand what was being done here locally, and what was being done in New York is not the same thing that's being done here. What's being done in Arizona is not the same thing that's being done here, or Texas, and vice versa. We all have our own thing. So what's happening in your real life? And that's the reality of a lot of our lives. But
mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people took on the hurt, the pain that they seen projected to them as
I took it on.
I know you did.
I know
you did.
As old as I am,
Anyway.
I've seen enough of this.
And that's it. And that's the disconnect. So, with that disconnect, it brought us to a point of, just bringing out here what we both know happened was the anger, the hurt, and everything else that happened that led to the election that was the last time that you ran for office.
Yes.
And in my opinion, when I got to work on the campaign and we started looking into it, that disconnect is what brought us to the conversation that we're here for today. It was a long way to say it. By the time most of this is put out here, we'll put it out in full, but most of this will be chopped down into little pieces, so it's digestible. But there was this aha moment. And
mm-hmm.
you want to share about the woman that you ran into?
Yeah, I can't remember what I was doing, but I got a telephone call,
mm-hmm.
and and I knew it was from Lincoln, and
Sure.
I knew it was from Lincoln, and so I said, well, maybe one of the state senators or somebody like that, or something, because I still have connections down
Sure.
there. So I answered the phone, and it was this woman, and you could tell she had an accent,
Mm-hmm.
and she said, I was given your number by a number of folks, and because I'm so-and-so, I can't remember her name right now, but I'm a PhD student studying in Lincoln.
Okay.
And my dissertation was on Black media in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I said, and she said, and so I started doing the research, and I couldn't find anything. And I looked at the phone for a minute. I said, what do you mean you can't find anything?
Right.
I said, Channel 7 has, now they don't have all my shows, nor do they have all the complete shows, but they should have video for you that reflects that period of time. And she said, well, they sent me some things. They sent me what they had. She said they were very cordial. They sent me what they had, but it really kind of, in a lot of ways, wasn't what I was looking for. And so I said, well, let me send you some stuff that I did on the show, because I had stuff in boxes and all of that. Mm-hmm. And so I sent her a few things, and this is what she was looking for.
Okay.
But then, like you said, it was the aha moment. I'm saying, God, there's nothing about Kaleidoscope anywhere. There's nothing about Jim Nelson's show anywhere. There's nothing about Charlie Washington, who the Washington Branch Library is named after. There's nothing anywhere.
Nothing.
All that journalism history is gone.
Not even at the library.
Yeah, and I said,
Yeah.
"Oh my goodness!" And that was the aha. And we had been in communications because you were,
Sure.
working on my campaign at the time, and
Yeah.
and see, and I kind of have to ask you a little bit because when I thought about it, I thought about, man, we got to save the shows. I mean, we just gotta digitize them. We got to do, and digitizing is where I left off.
Absolutely.
Okay. You weren't prepared to do that.
No. And that moment where we both looked at each other and realized, like, even bigger than Kaleidoscope, because Kaleidoscope, we just used that, even, I guess, that because it was on for 30 years, it was the longest running community show in the state. And we're looking to see nationally, but there's some longer ones running out there. But I mean, in the state of Nebraska, it was the longest running show, and I found that out later. But it also led to the discovery, as we were discovering together, that Hearst Media, Channel 7, a lot of places, not pointing a finger, that it was common practice that even though the internet had been growing and going for over 20, 30 years, that we just assumed that, like most things,
content would be there.
That they just put it up online.
Yeah.
You just archived it online because that's what had been done before, any other place. But when we got to the digital age, just now in 2023, as we kind of said at the beginning of this conversation, that it was not just Kaleidoscope had not been. We're talking about Husker games.
Yeah.
Go try to look up a Husker game from the Orange Bowl in '95, which is probably our pride and joy of Tom Osborne history, and it's not there. It's not on streaming. It's not on Hulu. It's not on any special access channel. It does not exist. And we're saying if things that are that massive to the culture, if sports is that big of what it is on a local, statewide level, that anything tape and media is lost right now. And we're looking at my age and younger saying, why don't you all get it? And we're like, get what? Because our largest, media right now to us is the internet. It's our phones and everything. Yeah. So we're looking at our phones. What is this guy talking about? What are these people talking about? What don't we get? We know it all. And that's the disconnect. That was the aha moment for me, where I realized, like, wait a minute. That means that, sure, you got the Omaha World Herald, and sure, you can scroll through all that stuff. And if it was physical paper, it was either on Fish, and they've translated it, and they've, started doing that. And I don't know how far their archives go back from, because at a point in time, right, you'd go to microfiche. Before the internet, you'd go to microfiche, which was like this little tiny film, and there was like this projector, and you looked through this viewfinder, and you could go see all the newspapers that they had scanned in. They had actually taken photo negatives and made them accessible only on this microfiche weird machine. Google it. It'll blow your mind, because that was the technology at the time. Yes. And I don't know what's even been translated from microfiche on newspaper-wise to now. Is it searchable on the Omaha World Herald as an example of journalism-wise? I just don't know what's been lost, but we're not talking ancient Egypt or something.
No, we're not talking ancient history. No, we're talking modern history. Modern history. That's been lost. That was lost, and
that's the culture.
Had I not talked to this woman,
right,
and had I not sat down and shared with you, my stuff would probably still be in boxes in my garage.
You brought a box in. You brought a box of tapes in, and that was the minute. Again, and heat and all the things, and if it's not in the proper storage, just like anything else, even if it's a hard drive with any media, ancient Egypt stone tablets, too much water, too much sand, it wears away, the roads are there. But we're talking about modern things. And so then to, our conversation of like, okay, well, we digitize this, Ben, and then great. And we do that. And we're like, well, how do we get anyone younger to even care?
Yeah.
How do we get them to give a damn about what Ben Gray did? Because again, they're so connected to their phones. We got to make it relevant. And they feel like, again, they were the first ones to go through a George Floyd incident, that they don't realize that even locally, not just nationally, even though there's a lot of national things that come up and rise to a head, that if you looked at the national stats, but the local stats, like you said, They came up with 2 or 3, and you said there was 11 murders.
Yes.
And we're not talking
highly questionable circumstances.
Highly questionable circumstances around the police department, and they're saying, well, we only found 3 because there's no continuation of information.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was when we had the conversation, and I said to myself, okay, how do we fix this? Because I didn't have an answer. Neither one of us, no one had an answer really. And we were looking it up, and I realized that the answer was right in front of us. It was social media. It was phones. This was the camera. This was their journalism device. This was their entertainment. This was their arts. This was their news and everything. It was their whole entire world. As if you know anyone, and even most adults, it is their entire world. It's how you make every connection possible. And if it doesn't exist on that platform, we failed.
Mm-hmm. We
have failed. But making it relevant was where agency came into play.
Yes.
We didn't have a name for it at the time. And agency is a social term. I had to find out because I knew the term agency of ownership and belonging and connectedness, but I didn't realize it was a social science term. The definition of agency, most people say it's a police agency, it's the CIA agency, it's the marketing agency. That's the type of agency most people know.
Mm-hmm.
But the agency, I found out the term that I used agency as was a social science term specifically, and I learned out that was the term that I wanted to use. People already had the tools, they already had the know-how, they just had to turn on the switch and realize it was within them.
Mm-hmm.
They just had to realize that it was with them, and they needed the agency to assert that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to that more, but this media to get youth and even adults engaged with that, I was like, what does this look like? How do we do this? And you and I had a conversation, and I explained it to you. I was like, it's their phones, it's those sort of things. And we go down this road of, well, how do we create curriculum around it?
Mm-hmm.
I said, we can say curriculum, but don't say that to the kids, because it's a light switch for them, as they're going to learn regardless. The minute you set up a camera, you set up some mics, you set up some lights, and this is everything that they watch on their phones, and you show them how to take agency themselves,
mm-hmm.
and look a little bit deeper into the right tools, make them accessible to the media that's lost out here, because the term that I learned is lost media, which is where media in modern day history, whether it's records, tapes, film,
Mm-hmm.
if it's not converted over, it's lost.
It's lost.
And we can only think about the number of programs and shows and media that is our current history that are gone. So we build that around something that's fun.
Yes.
And that's where agency kind of came in. I said to myself, like, there's got to be a space and a place for content creators, these kids who are making videos, they're doing the dances, they're doing everything else. They're tweeting and they're sharing about Instagram stories about George Floyd and how that makes them feel, their experiences around their classroom and everything and their whole entire world. But what if we have a space and a place that has all of that built in? It has lights and camera already plug and play, similar to a space like this would be, where these kids can now talk about their news, talk about their journalism on what's important to them, make their own videos, learn how to edit them, but have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
Take the rails off, let them have fun with it. But I guarantee they're going to have some folks around there like yourself and me and other folks that have some of that lost experience. And they're going to say, well, how do we do more on this? And we're going to engage them on how to find out more and dig deeper about what they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's dance, we'll have some dance instructors come into a dance studio that's set up for influencers and creators to just create their dances and do their things. And that's culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's everything culture that could be. And that was the dream that, you know, I kind of shared with you. You said, I have no idea what you're talking about. But after I said it's like having a Kaleidoscope studio and other things in there, then I think it clicked for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I don't know, anything else that you remember or that you want to kind of talk about that you were thinking about this whole process that would help?
You know, you mentioned that I told you, and I've said publicly that I'm not a politician.
Sure.
You know, because we got to find ways we got to find ways to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We got to find ways to come together and talk to each other. And I don't mean just black and white and others. I mean young and old. I mean, we got to find a way to really let the young people understand historically, what it was about. You all saw George Floyd. I saw Rodney King. Okay? So there's history there that needs to be talked about, especially with various organizations. But the main thing is, when I was in office, if you look at it from a political perspective, there were 4 Democrats on the council.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could always kind of count on them most of the time if I wanted to pass something. But I didn't want 4 votes. I wanted 7 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get 7 votes, you have to talk to your Republican colleagues. And not just talk to them. I mean, not just try and persuade them.
Sure.
You got to talk to them.
Right. You
got
to
say, look, what's your perspective on my introduction to the land bank?
Mm-hmm.
What bothers you about it? And is there language that I could change that keeps the intent of what I want to do, but makes the concerns that my Republican colleagues had a little more comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
So that was always conversation.
Sure.
And if you look at a lot of times and a lot of the votes that went down, especially when you start talking about the landlord registry and a couple of other things like that. Again, I'm not a politician.
Sure.
I would have never introduced the landlord registry if I were a politician. But, looking at all of those, those kinds of things that don't make you, it's what's good for the city.
Absolutely.
It was good for the city to address problems with landlords. It was good for the city to try and figure out, the empty lots and the abandoned buildings and not tearing down so many places and so forth. It was good for the city. It wasn't good for, and I looked at the city because as a city councilman, you're still responsible for the city, along with the mayor.
So on that point, with that talking together, how do you see agency then? We're talking about new media and engaging different ways and learning about how to talk to each other and generationally specifically, because that disconnect's there. But then, like you said, it's not a black or white thing. It's not a Republican or Democrat thing, but it's us as people, right? Right. How do you see agency doing something like that? And
I see agency being a part of that from several perspectives.
Absolutely.
But just a number of perspectives, but one for sure. Things that I covered then are relevant now in a different way. And so the way we use agency, my thoughts, the way we use agency is, like, for example, if we're talking about issues of gang violence and so forth, there were some comments as early as 79 on the show that I did with Bill Cosby that has content in it that's relevant to what we're talking about. We're going to bring activity today.
We got to digitize, so we're gonna teach the truth to young,
Farrakhan. Everybody looked at him. Everybody looks at him in a certain way.
Sure.
I went to Kansas.
Okay.
Because I wanted the whole speech, I wanted the interview, I wanted everything.
Sure.
So that because people have an impression about him, but I'm saying, is the impression reality? And the only way to know whether it's a reality or not is to go.
Okay.
And ask the tough questions.
So you bring, like you said, you're gonna go like showing some of these media, sections, let them know that they're not the only ones that have been through some of these things. What else do you see as far as like going back to some of that? That could be impactful.
Yeah, that can be impactful. But I think the other thing too is just the whole thing about police. I think they need to, first of all, they need to know what went down.
Sure.
And I think they need to know in specific detail sometimes what was being said at the time.
Sure.
There was one gentleman that was killed by police, And the
Locally.
story was locally.
Okay.
And the story was that he ran through this gas station, and
Sure.
they saw him run through the gas station, and they saw him, and he jumped out of this window
Right.
into these tires, a whole bunch of tires underneath. Police couldn't catch him, so they had to shoot him in the back. Now, the fact of the matter is that the window that he jumped out
Right.
of was a cast iron window that was about the size of a sheet of paper, 8 by 10, 8 and a half by 11. That's the window that they say he jumped out of. Really? I mean, really?
It's those types of stories,
Yeah.
though. So you got again, learning your history, that disconnect there, and seeing the progress is really big, because
the progress is what's important.
And then that turns on a switch of like, okay. And I'm just, again, you're the person that had the show, so we're not picking at you, but just saying, Ben did do something.
Yes.
That generation did do something.
We did do something.
And it wasn't just Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the usual suspects. It was a lot of the people in the community that marched, that were out here talking and communicating, and have the progress is there.
Mm-hmm.
But without that being known, without that being exposed and access to it, you start feeling, again, a lot of these youth, they don't have any context to who and what your generation did.
How many young people, when they go to the Washington Branch Library, know who Charlie Washington
They
was?
probably think it's George Washington.
Right?
Know, first thing is, even if they see
mean,
the first part of it, they're just like Washington.
But Charlie Washington was
right.
the premier black journalist in Omaha.
Okay.
Premier. Okay? To show you how premier he was, after the Bill Cosby show ran, I got a call from Charlie. I need for you to come over.
Okay.
And I said, okay. I said, well, I got a couple of things that I'm doing, but I said, no, I need for you to come over now. And he's Charlie Washington.
So you got to go.
So I got to go.
Yeah.
He's the premier journalist.
Right.
I mean, you know, so I got to go. I'm a journalist. I got to go see him.
Sure.
You know,
respect.
He sat me down. You know, we went through the show. He showed me some things where, you know, I could have done it a little bit better and stuff like that. But then he started counseling me on them.
Nice.
Every time I do a show, then I'd say, okay, what did I do wrong this time? You know, and it was funny because but I needed the coach. I needed Charlie and other people in the community to evaluate what I was doing.
And that's, I mean, we're going to talk a lot more about this, but that's exactly where that's the type of mentorship, connection to journalism, to arts, to entertainment, that if they have you had a Charlie Washington, I have a Ben Gray, and I'm hoping I can do the same. And that's what agency comes into, is like showing, mentoring, guiding, but again, in a fun, easy way for them to do what they do. But there isn't anything like this in the country. No. Believe it or not, there's no space or place that is for content creators and that's focused on Black youth in the country. Not even, let's just take out the Black out of it. There are no content creator focused spaces and places like a rec center for content creators. It doesn't exist. All the journalism, the arts and entertainment will be infused in there. We're not going to tell them that. It will come out later on, but they'll just be having fun doing what they do and what they're passionate about. And they'll have a Ben Gray, they'll have a Jason Fisher, and they'll have other people that are, you know, seasoned professionals around them to help elevate and do what they do. Because we got it for sports. We got it for, you know, a lot of other activities that are out there. We definitely could take the country and, instead of brain drain, be a magnet for the country if we had a space or place like this. But we're going to talk more. This is just kind of the first installment, so I appreciate you having the conversation. And
I appreciate being here. Jason, I appreciated your ideas from the beginning, because, you know, my ideas were limited by age and not knowing certain things and so forth. And listening to you talk and the connection that you have with young people and older people, and how do we connect those dots? Yeah. You know, I think this is an extraordinary opportunity to connect some dots and talk about some history, but not only just talk about the history, talk about where that takes us.
where it goes to the future.
Yeah, where it goes to,
Absolutely.
and these young people have to have a role in that.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, they got to have the chief role in that.
That's it. They're leading the way.
And they got to lead the way, but they can't do it from a perspective of ignorance.
No,
They just can't.
that part.
If you do that, you make the same mistakes that others have made in the past, and we stay stagnant.
That's our most valuable resource, is our culture.
Yes.
And that is the baton, torch that we're passing to them.
Yes.
So I thank you for that.
We're going to get there.
All right.